Welcome to the Global Tech Leaders Podcast, where we help business leaders and individual contributors with actionable insights to hit their number and figure out the nuances of truly operating a business globally today, squeezing the essence of the lessons learned from the planet's top tech leaders. This is your guide to joining the fast track to global market scaling.
Welcome, I'm Ross Lauder, your host from Single Focus Talent. So today we are joined by a representative of the Irish government, Neal Richmond. Neal has had an interesting career throughout politics, where he is now what we would refer to as a TD, a Teachta Dála, or our equivalent of an MP, having been in the Senate prior to that, the upper houses of our Oireachtas. I thought that Neal would be a very interesting guest to have on today's show, simply because he has been the government's spokesperson on Brexit, which was all that anyone was ever talking about before COVID-19. And I'm sure that's something that we'll touch upon today. So welcome very much to today's show, Neal.
Thanks very much for having me on, Ross.
Well, maybe if you just walk us through your career so far and kind of tell us what you're passionate about and kind of where that's led you to where we are now in the light of forming a new government.
Yeah, well, I'll try and speed it up so I'm not giving you a full CV, but I got involved in politics as an activist when I was in university, joined a political party, and politics is extremely addictive. It's like sports, it's like business, and the more you get involved, the more it takes over. So upon leaving university, I decided I wanted to work in politics. So I went over to Brussels. I did an internship. I worked a member of the EU Parliament for a couple of years. That was dealing with overseas development aid. So I spent a stint in Africa before coming home to Ireland in 2007 to work for an Irish member of Parliament in the Dáil here. Did that for a while, and at the opportunity came along my way to run for local elections in 2009 for our home area. And I was elected successfully in 2009, went on to become deputy mayor. Obviously, councillor is a part-time position, so professionally I then moved into project management for a not-for-profit, where we were working with businesses and groups on how to access funding from the EU. And going on in 2016, I was elected to our Senate. Spent the last 4 years there before being elected into the Dáil, into Parliament in February of this year. And in terms of what I was passionate about, consistent through all my work has been involved with European politics and the European Union. And it's something I'm extremely interested in and I've always worked on, and something I truly believe in. And then as a public representative, you don't get involved if you don't believe in your community and bringing people along in terms of various sectors, business groups and everything else. So it's been a very enjoyable just over 11 years now as an elected representative, and hopefully I have a few more years left in me yet.
Certainly, no doubt at all. Plenty of interesting challenges ahead for sure. So for some of our US-based listeners, you mentioned the European Union there. Would you maybe just describe for us what that project was envisaged to achieve, what benefit it's brought to Ireland from our membership in what was then the EEC back in 1974, when we joined at the same time as the United Kingdom? Maybe if you just walk us through kind of the evolution of it and some of the benefits we've had from it, as it were.
Absolutely. Well, the start of the European project, and it's had many different names, it's rooted in the Second World War. And the whole aim of the original iteration in the late 50s was to bring together the 6 countries that were most devastated by the Second World War: Germany, Italy, France, the 3 Benelux countries, and bring them together. And it was, how do we stop war going in the future? How do we stop fighting each other, which is something we've been consistently doing since the dawn of time. So they basically came up with a relatively rudimentary plan to pool the tools of war. And in order to have a war, you need to have guns, you need to have tanks, you need to have planes to create those, you need steel to create the steel, you need coal to power the plants and everything else. So that's how it started in the 50s with the European Coal and Steel Commission. It was coming out of the post-war period, helped a lot by US Marshall Aid. The economy started to regrow, particularly in Western Germany, and it became the European Economic Community. And they decided we need to make sure we can guarantee our food sources and make sure our food is safe. So they created the Common Agriculture Policy. They wanted to make sure energy was protected, so they created Euratom. And it kept growing and growing and growing until Western Europe started to really economically and socially move out of the post-war malaise, and it was a direct counterpoint to the communist approach in Eastern Europe, authoritarian approach in Southern Europe. You still have Franco in Spain and the generals in Greece. And in 1972, 4 countries, Ireland, Denmark, the UK and Norway, applied to join and had a referenda to join the EEC. Now, Ireland, the UK and Denmark all joined. Norway voted not to join. And Ireland at that time, without going into too much of a historical overlook, it was a very different country. It was a very poor country. Up until the late 50s, it had a very closed mindset when it comes to international trade or partnership. It was very culturally conservative, and it will go on to be for some years yet. But joining the EEC completely changed things. When Ireland joined the EEC in 1973, 60% of our exports went to the UK. Last quarter of 2019, which I suppose is a bit more accurate of a reaction than this year, that was just below 10%. So our reliance on the UK has completely changed in the 40 odd years of membership of the European project. Europe has changed. It's gone from the original 6 member states up until 28 member states in 2016, when sadly the UK voted to leave. What Europe has given Ireland, it gives us access to the European single market, the world's largest economic bloc. It gives us access to European trade deals. So all our foreign trade is governed through European trade deals, and we've seen new deals in terms of increasing levels of exports with Canada, South Korea, Japan. There's really big ambitions for cracking into Indonesia and Vietnam and Malaysia. And that's big for Ireland's exports, not just in terms of our agri-food, but diversifying into, pharmaceuticals, into medical technology, and really looking at our digital economy, which is so important to not just Dublin, but the wider island of Ireland. It's been a great source of peace for this country. Obviously, we had a very dark period of troubles in Northern Ireland, and huge funding and huge economic advancement of being part of the European project helped us move on from that. It's also allowed for huge social advances. You have to remember that just over 25 years ago, homosexuality was illegal in Ireland. The term illegitimate was still used in our constitution to talk about children born out of wedlock. We've had huge changes, becoming the first country to vote by referendum to bring about equal marriage. We've changed our abortion laws. We've introduced divorce in 1995, something that wasn't there before. So a lot of that has been certainly, if not pushed, encouraged by our common European membership. And the great challenge we face now is our geographically closest neighbour and one of our closest economic ties, the UK, has left the EU, and now we're in the process of finalising the negotiations in the manner how they will leave.
Okay, so that's a great overview and summary of the European project thus far to date. I suppose for our listeners, could you maybe just describe some of the nuances? Well, look, first of all, what was Brexit? How did it come about? And why is Ireland so unique? And when I say Ireland, I'm referring to the Republic of Ireland as well as Northern Ireland and the island of Ireland. What are some of the major challenges and unique nuances that we face as a nation, kind of pre and post Brexit, and where do you see that ending up?
Well, certainly the British relationship with the European project has been difficult from the outset. The first person to come up with an idea of a sort of a European Union was Winston Churchill, but the UK sat out the early original iteration of the European project. A lot of people would have said that, well, the UK viewed itself as a victor in the Second World War, which of course technically they were, even though they had economic and social destruction. The UK very much saw itself as one of the superpowers, even though the change in geopolitics would say that the only superpowers were the US and the USSR at the time. When the UK joined the EEC, it was very much out of economic necessity. It was losing competitiveness with France and Germany, and said, well, we need to have proper access to the single market. And the first thing the UK did when it joined the EEC in 1973 was decide to have a vote in 1975, have a referendum on whether they should leave. So they weren't even in 2 years and they started talking about leaving. And this progressed. And as the European Union grew, and the European Union that we have today is very, very different to what was around in the 70s, when it was a lot more of a looser relationship, the British position became more difficult. They feared that it was being driven by a French agenda or a German agenda. They feared that Britain's status as a large financial player was under threat, and we had a huge standoff between Margaret Thatcher and Jacques Delors over the amount. See, when it comes to the EU, richer member states are known as what is net contributors. So they pay in more, and other member states get more back in terms of direct payments. And Ireland would have been a net recipient for a long time. That changed in the last few years. So the UK relationship has always been difficult, and there was a real political push that they should weaken or dilute the European project and ultimately leave. And that move to leave the EU started in the late 90s, and it started within the Conservative Party, which is ironic because in 1973 it was the Labour Party who was opposed to joining the EEC, and the Conservatives who were the passionate supporters. And eventually, leading up to the general election of 2015, Prime Minister David Cameron in 2014 made a pledge saying that if re-elected, he would have a straight in or out referendum. And he was elected, and they did have that referendum. Now, the referendum campaign itself was extremely narrow. The victory for Leave was just under 2%. It was a fairly vicious campaign, and it missed a lot of the real detail and the nuance. The problem was you had 40 years of British political establishment and British red top media attacking the EU, now turning around, people trying to say why they should stay in. The impacts are great for all EU member states, but the country that will suffer the most actually is the UK. They'll lose those access to those lucrative European trade deals. They have yet to negotiate their terms of access to the single market. They're talking about trading on WTO terms, which leads to huge tariffs and things like that. And where Ireland comes into it is not just the difficulties, but I'm going to touch on a couple of the opportunities. I suppose the difficulties, and the most obvious one, is that the island of Ireland has been divided since 1922 in terms of Northern Ireland, which is still part of the UK, has a predominantly British population, or a population that identifies itself as British, and then Ireland, the Republic, which has been independent since 1922, a republic since 1949, and has always been very pro-European in outlook. So with the UK leaving, it meant there was only one remaining land border between the UK and the EU, and that was the border on the island of Ireland. You complicate that by, as I've mentioned, the fact that for over 30 years we've had conflict in the region in Northern Ireland. We had a really dirty period known as the Troubles, which was harrowing in terms of the IRA and the UVF, bombing, shootings, really, really horrible. And we've had peace since 1998, but it is a fragile peace. And the huge concern that I suppose really focused the early part of the Brexit negotiations is, well, we can't have a return to a hard border. The border that we know in Ireland now, you drive across it and you don't notice it. The only thing that changes, the road markings change colour. You go from driving in kilometres per hour to miles per hour. You go back to the 70s and it was a closed border. You had military patrols, you had watchtowers, you also had customs officials. So the nature of the UK's economic departure could and will have a massive impact on its relationship with Ireland. And that's something in the early parts of Brexit, before the UK actually left when they're negotiating the terms, we had to make sure we had a clause that protected the island of Ireland, that made sure that Northern Ireland would still have the benefits of the European single market and customs unions to ensure that there's no hardening of the border in the island of Ireland. And that has something that's been resolved in the withdrawal agreement, which is now the withdrawal treaty, an international treaty. The other couple of areas that make Ireland a bit more susceptible, we are largely reliant on the UK as a trading partner, but that's changed greatly. You know, our biggest trading partner is actually the US, second is Belgium, and third is the UK. Overall, the EU, the remaining 27 is by far our biggest market. But the UK is still a significant market, particularly for certain sectors in the agri-food sector in terms of beef production. It's very difficult to buy a McDonald's hamburger in the UK without eating Irish beef. But other areas, I suppose, in terms of a lot of our goods go to the continent, but they go to the continent through the UK. So it's known as the land bridge. You ship to the UK through and it drives across the EU. It's a cheaper, quicker method to do it. But in terms that also has the flip that we have a common travel agreement with the UK that goes back to 1922, which means that Irish and British people can travel between each other's countries without any need to show passports or get work permits or visas. We can work in each other's countries, we can go to university, we can make sure we get those reciprocal benefits. That wasn't always open to other EU member states, so Ireland has always had that advantage. You know, Irish people vote in British general elections and vice versa. And other areas like Ireland and the UK are the only two common law jurisdictions in the region. We're the only two common law jurisdictions in the EU. In Ireland, we're native English speakers. We're the only EU member state, apart from Malta, that has English as an official language. And certainly we have a huge cultural and social exchange with the UK that other member states simply don't. We consume British media, we follow British soccer teams, everything that goes with it. We have an except close, historically times, difficult relationship with the UK, but certainly in the post-Brexit era, whilst there's no such thing as a good Brexit, Ireland will very much be the gateway between the UK and the EU.
Okay, so that's a very comprehensive a scenario, and I think what's very different about Ireland is our historical context. And one of the things that gets missed, I think, in the European project that is advantageous is the fact that anyone can come to Ireland, and certainly pre-Brexit, to live and work and set up shop tomorrow without any job offer or visa requirement. I think what's very unique about Ireland post-Brexit is that Irish citizens will retain the ability to live and work in the UK should they wish. And as you mentioned there, vote in each other's elections. I don't know any other countries that have that bilateral agreement where we can move to each other's countries and vote in each other's elections tomorrow, with the exception of the President of Ireland. I know British citizens are not allowed to vote in the Irish presidential elections, and the reason for that is that we were never given the opportunity to vote for the Queen. But in any case, I think that's a very unique scenario. So now post-Brexit, European Union citizens will be, in my opinion, gravitating more towards Ireland as an international hub for business. And we've built our reputation as a country on having the headquarters for Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Salesforce, HubSpot, you name it, they're here. Do you feel that post-Brexit, that given there's a challenge with physical goods crossing the border with Northern Ireland and certainly the rest of Britain, do you feel that there is an advantage from a services industry perspective in these kind of born digital organizations that Ireland becomes somewhat more attractive as an opportunity?
Oh, absolutely. You know, we're very lucky in Ireland that we've always got a history of being open. We're an immigrant people. I lived for a couple of years in Belgium. It's very hard to go to a country around the world without finding an Irish pub or Irish people. And in turn, that means we're a very welcoming place. It's a good country to come to work in. And we need talent. We need talent from the EU and from outside the EU to come into core areas. And these are to come into high paying jobs. So in my constituency, Microsoft have a very large establishment, over 2,000 employees. But they have 2,000 employees from 72 different countries. And you have a lot of places in Ireland that they're the European HQ or they're the EMEA HQ. And certainly post-Brexit, that is an area in tech, in digital, in financial services where there's huge scope for growth. And we've already seen that. It is certainly comparing the UK to Ireland. Ireland is a cheaper place to come, particularly compared to the City of London, in terms of getting accommodation, in terms of setting up. The workforce is talented, the workforce is intelligent, everything is done through English, but it means that people can come and settle here very quickly. Freedom of movement is one of the core concepts of the European Union. As I mentioned, I booked a plane ticket on a Friday and I emigrated to Belgium the next week. And that's something that is a huge benefit that we have and we will have over the UK going forward. And certainly for Ireland as a platform, not just for the UK into the EU, but particularly North America, the US, Canada. We've seen a lot of American companies come and set up really large establishments here. But also there's an awful lot of Irish businesses like Cement, Roadstone Holdings, Kerry Group that are employing a lot of American people in their operations in the US and also into Canada and across the globe. So for Ireland, we very much have an outward-looking point of view going forward. And if anything, Brexit will increase that capability and certainly give companies and individuals a greater opportunity that, you know, in Ireland you can get the best of both worlds in terms of access to both the EU and the UK markets.
Okay. So in terms of that, I know, from my own family business background, my father was very much involved in physical goods, so the chemical, pharmaceutical, raw material supplies. He was quite involved with the dairy industries, and we have a situation in Ireland where you might milk a cow in the Republic, you might have a truck come from Northern Ireland to take that milk for processing in the UK to be then bottled in the Republic to be sold back into the UK, again back and forth through Northern Ireland, but actually to the rest of the UK, which in itself will bring tariffs that there's an obligation to charge on, therefore being compliant with EU rules in the common market, etc. I just wanted to drill into the challenges for physical goods, if you would, and the solution that's being worked through at the moment with the withdrawal agreement specifically, and we can talk about services in a moment, but could you just take us through what the original intention of the backstop was and where we are now with the replacement for that?
We've moved from a situation where the withdrawal agreement is now the withdrawal treaty. So it's legally binding and it's compliant to international law. And what we have now, the situation that the EU and the UK are currently, literally as we speak right now today, negotiating, are in the fourth round of negotiations of the future relationship between the UK and the EU. Now that's due to conclude at the end of this calendar year. And that will be the future relationship going forward. At the moment, nothing has changed. The UK are still, even though they've left the EU, they're completely compliant with EU rules, and it's as if they haven't left. This is the transition period to allow businesses to prepare. What has been agreed in terms of the withdrawal agreement for Northern Ireland, you have the backstop, but now you have what people call the front stop. So depending on how these negotiations go, there is unfortunately a fair chance that the future relationship between the UK and the EU will be very narrow. Or unfortunately, there could be the situation that no trade deal is reached. So that means that the UK is trading with the EU with WTO terms, and that the tariff schedule is quite daunting, particularly on agri-food businesses. But Northern Ireland, regardless of what happens with these negotiations, it's governed by the Northern Irish Protocol. And it's threefold, but the third fold, which is what the most likely to kick in, that means that Northern Ireland remains completely compliant with the terms and standards of the European single market, and equally that they will apply the customs code of the European Union. That means that that means that there's no need for any physical checks or disruptions between Ireland north or south. There would be need for checks at ports or on ferries either side of the Irish Sea between Northern Ireland and Great Britain, which is a challenge, but it means that Northern Ireland still has access fully to both markets, and of course peace trumps economics. The situation gets trickier when we talk about the overall relationship between the EU and the UK, because the EU is of course the UK's largest export market and relies on it for so much, and UK industries that do export would face huge challenges. Equally, the UK is a major food importer. The UK only produces about 80% of the food it consumes, whereas Ireland is the other end of the extreme. We produce 35 times more food than we actually need because we largely export it. But again, our biggest market, depending on the sector, cheddar cheese, dairy goods, beef goods would largely go to the UK, although things like lamb and fish projects would more likely have a continental destination, and then things like evaporated milk goes very much to Southeast Asia and Central America. So we're in the process, or we hope that we're in the process of agreeing a future relationship between the EU and the UK that's quite close. However, this is where politics comes into it, and the political machinations in the UK have been extremely daunting. We went from a situation in 2016 when Boris Johnson, as someone who proposed Brexit, and he wasn't in government, he wasn't Prime Minister at the time, very much stated that, well, the UK would never leave the single market, to the situation now where the UK is absolutely threatening to leave the single market, and the election slogan of December that was so successful for the Conservatives was very much "Get Brexit Done." Mm-hmm. The rationality of debate and the economic impact of Brexit has completely departed the scene in the UK. If it was about economics, Brexit makes no sense anyway, but economically it makes absolutely zero sense. And unfortunately, the very nationalistic approach, which has become on trend in countries around the world, is absolutely embodied by the whole notion of Brexit and potentially leaving without a deal.
So if we were to, just kind of fast forward a bit and get out our crystal ball to some degree, and we've already seen a gravitation of business towards Ireland. I mean, Barclays moved $3 trillion worth of assets to Dublin. I'm curious to know, like, how will we trade after Brexit in a no deal, or maybe in some sort of a deal scenario? And what I mean by that is, my career has been spent largely in technology businesses. And when I was managing sales teams across the European EMEA context, a lot of my business was in the DACH region. So 40% of my businesses, Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. And then again, and for our listeners, Switzerland is not a member of the European Union. But the UK was up to another 40%. And the joke we used to have was if UK sneezed, everybody got a cold type of thing. So I'm curious to know, like, what do you feel like our trading relationship will be like with the rest of the UK versus the rest of the European Union in a post-Brexit scenario? So, for example, I'm in Microsoft or some similar organization. I'm selling into the UK because, you know what, it's a big market. They may see a downturn in their own domestic economy.
Yeah, like,
what does that look like for you? How do we trade with them?
well, it's the nature of trade, even over just the last 4 years, has changed drastically. Our exposure to the UK market is dropping every day because companies, and indeed its government policy, are looking at the other alternatives, and we've seen huge growths in terms of exports with Germany and France, but also other continental European countries, and there's a huge amount of potential there. Obviously, the UK is our nearest neighbour, and for time-sensitive goods and real-time operations in the market, it'll always be a partner. But if you're a UK importer and all of a sudden the goods you're buying from Ireland are 20% or 40% more expensive overnight due to a tariff schedule, you're simply going to buy less of them. You add in the onslaught in COVID-19 and the general contraction of business that is likely to come anyway, and it makes things more difficult. One way or the other, unfortunately, the nature of Brexit means that Ireland's exposure to the UK will decline, whatever deal is reached. Our exposure to the continent is growing rapidly. Our exposure to non-EU countries that the EU has trading deals with is growing every day. And I've mentioned South Korea, Japan, Canada, Mexico, and also the potential in other areas, the fact that we're about to have a European trade deal with Australia and New Zealand. But again, geography matters in global trade. And the goods that we export, we've had to change things a lot. So Ireland produces a lot of dairy produce. The only country really in the world that eats cheddar cheese like we do is the UK, to a lesser extent North America, down to Australasia. So you've seen companies change their processing, and they've got grants from the government to produce more buffalo mozzarella. And it's to change the goods to make sure that we can get more Irish food on European tables. But again, it comes to, well, if you're in a Michelin star restaurant in Paris, you're not going to be just serving the same beef that up to now had been exported to McDonald's in the UK. It's just different cuts. So it's a huge challenge. And the sector that is most exposed in Ireland is absolutely our agri-food sector. And it's a huge challenge. And diversifying this is something that's ongoing. We have to try and maintain that level of access into and through the UK. But I still, as I said, geography isn't going to change. The UK will still be a major trading partner of Ireland, and it will be a huge exchange of people and talent between the UK and Ireland regardless, and that's something that's been safeguarded, thankfully. But certainly any Irish business that's in an export area or dealing with goods has very much been looking at diversification and has received the support from government for diversification where possible over the last couple of years.
Okay, that's very clear. I suppose, to summarize, do you feel that this is a physical goods versus a services challenge? So it's very much a bigger challenge with the physical goods going across borders, and that land bridge through the mainland of Britain is a challenge. Would you see that as a fair assessment?
Yeah, certainly for Ireland, the focus is on the physical goods, not just because of our exposure to the UK market, but the fact that we trade through the UK. Services is a far more difficult area, and regardless of what happens with Brexit, the City of London is still going to be a financial powerhouse. And this is the trick, is you have competing European interests. So the financial services market in Ireland, particularly focused on Dublin, would see itself very much as complementary to the UK, whereas Paris, and to a lesser extent Frankfurt, would see themselves competing with the UK and with the City of London. So there's a little bit of a pull in terms of allowing access of British financial services. And again, this comes down to, well, what is the nature of the trade deal and the services deal and the customs deal that's concluded between the UK and the EU. The closer the deal, the more services will move a lot easier. The narrower the deal, the more distant the deal, and the more impact it will have on services which would absolutely impact other continental European member states more than Ireland. When it comes to Brexit, as I said, geography is key. And if you look at Ireland, is the European member state most exposed to the UK. The UK is in between Ireland and the continent. After that, you're looking at the three Benelux countries, Nordic countries like Denmark and Sweden, Germany, France, and Spain. Beyond that, when you get to certain countries like Bulgaria, maybe Romania, Poland, they're really not as exposed to the UK. They are in terms of a people term, in terms of the amount of Polish people who go to live and work in the UK, or seasonal workers from Romania and Bulgaria who go to the UK farms, but they're not as reliant on the UK as a trading partner or as an exchange of services. So that's where the difficulty lies, that Ireland is absolutely in the eye of the storm, but it also in turn is the country most or best placed to kind of make any opportunities from Brexit as well.
Yeah, I would tend to agree, and I would see that as very much being the case. I suppose our economic strategy through the mid-90s, when we reduced our corporation tax rate to 12, well, it's finalized at 12.5%, has very much been pro-business to create employment, and tax receipts, ironically, are higher in a scenario where you have a lower corporation tax per head of capita than anywhere else. And obviously we have then an infrastructure around VAT and payroll taxes through PSI, PAYE, that's collected revenue for the government. My biggest kind of question there would be, what are the UK likely to do in a scenario where there is a deal or no deal? I mean, it would seem the most obvious thing to do is to lower their corporation tax rate. And I know historically they've sort of given out to us as being a quote unquote tax haven, which is a term I vehemently object to, because we have transparency, and one of the key criteria for a tax haven is secrecy, which we absolutely don't have. We're extremely compliant with other global states in relation to tax compliance, etc., and it's a very open and efficient system. But what would you say there in relation to the UK's kind of tools in their tool belt, as it were, in a post-Brexit scenario to kind of become the Singapore of Europe, as has been suggested?
Yeah, like there's certainly, like, the narrative that's being pushed by the hard Brexit agenda, it's a very narrow narrative, and I don't think it will work, is absolutely cutting taxes and standards. So cutting trade deals that allow the UK to... The EU has extremely high food and environmental standards, and for good reason. But the lower food standards you have, the more your population is at risk, and the lesser the quality. So there's certainly a low quality cut to standards to allow for cheaper food and exports, and that goes across the board, would be one thing that that would certainly be pursued by the current UK political leadership, even though ironically the UK was the biggest supporter of standards within the EU. I'm sure there'll be measures to look at, and the UK is always, like, they do have a relatively low corporation tax for a larger EU member state, and it has to be remembered that Ireland at 12.5, it's not the lowest. The average corporation tax in the EU is 16%, and there's many countries that are lower than Ireland. You know, Hungary has a 9% corporation tax, things like that. And what Ireland is going for is not just a lower tax rate, it's the fact that we are a highly educated, proportionally a lot more of our population have gone to third level, English speaking, as I said, open economy, a simplified tax as well as a lower tax, and making sure that business can get here and get up and running as quickly as possible. And we've seen that through general global comparisons, that Ireland of the EU is certainly the easiest place to come and set up business, and globally will be up there with places like New Zealand and Singapore. Like the UK, I have no doubt if they pursue a very hard Brexit deal, will be very aggressive in their response. And certain people will make a lot of money of it. I would call them kind of venture capitalists, disaster capitalists in the UK. But overall, the population will see their food standards drop, and will see the level of trade drop, because European countries will buy less British goods if the standards aren't up there. Most countries in the world, like we've seen the UK's targeted trading partners like India and Australia and Canada, and said, yeah, absolutely, we'll do a trade deal with the UK, but once we've done one with the EU first. And the European market is the world's largest global economic bloc. That's why people want to trade with the EU a lot more than the UK. It's got 450 million people in the EU compared to 60 odd million people in the UK. It's simply just, it's economies of scale. And unfortunately, it's the pursuit policy about a certain element of the British ruling class at the moment is a bit of a race to the bottom. And the EU stands counter to that. And it's a worry, but I don't think it's necessarily a threat for the EU, because we're playing a different game when it comes to things like that.
Yeah, I would fully agree with that position. I mean, you mentioned there about the kind of pillar criteria, as I would describe them, that allow Ireland to be that environment. We've got the three T's that the IDA talk about, so tax, talent, track record. It's all very well having a low corporation tax in a jurisdiction, you know, in a Caribbean island, but if there isn't the talent and the access and the track record to that, then it's of very, very little use to you. And I think the other thing post-Brexit we're going to see is that the UK has built their Brexit campaign around having a visa policy similar to Australia, which ironically was designed to encourage immigration, not discourage it. But they're talking about a visa system, which I don't have full details of. I don't know if you do, Neale, but that's something we can certainly discuss. I think that you'll notice that European Union citizens will not be going to the UK to just find their fortunes without a job or in a sector where the visa is forthcoming. So therefore, I see Ireland as having that distinct advantage in a post-Brexit scenario. And again, we've also got the other organizations that are kind of here already. So I just wanted to see if you felt that the visa policy from the UK would be something that would lend itself to particular industries, or how do you see that playing itself out if you were to speculate?
Yeah, no, it's definitely been a very worrying approach taken by the UK in the last couple of months. Their Attorney General and their Home Secretary have pursued a narrow immigration policy. One of the things that makes the EU work is the freedom of movement, and the UK has sought to stop that. Now, the withdrawal treaty, as passed, guarantees the rights of European and UK citizens, so in each other's jurisdictions. Bearing in mind, there's about 3 million British nationals living in the EU, nearly 1 million of them in Spain. And that their rights have been guaranteed. But certainly going forward, the UK wants to stem immigration. Now, if you're looking to build a thriving, open economy that's outward looking, restricting immigration makes no sense. In Ireland, we have talent shortfalls that need to be filled, not just by EU nationals, but particularly non-EU nationals. We need people be in the tech sector, bookkeeping, hospitality. These are good, high-paid jobs. Med tech, everything that goes beyond that. It's not just making sure we have mass numbers to come in and do seasonal work. The UK is taking a very worrying approach. If you look at the fact that over 30% of their NHS, their hospital system, is staffed by foreign nationals, as they're known in the UK, you know, that would have a huge negative effect. And that, you talk about a brain drain when people leave a country, but it goes the other way. And if you turn off the tap and you don't have that talent coming in, there's a huge impact on the economy. And people from around the world work in the UK. But if the UK is restricting that, it's definitely something very worrying. But people will be looking at, well, if I can't go to the UK, it turns out, as you mentioned earlier, Barclays have tripled their workforce in Dublin. And it's not just to deal with Irish issues, it's far beyond that. We've had about 6,000 jobs created in the financial services sector since Brexit, new jobs, good jobs. And people are going, well, Ireland is clearly an alternative destination, either to set up my business, to establish a subsidiary from my British counterpart, to make sure I have that passport into the European single market, but equally to make sure that my talent can come and work quickly and securely in an environment to know that, well, look, if you come here on a work permit, we're not going to rescind it after 6 months. That's not clear in the case of the UK. And it's certainly something that international investors around the world are extremely worried about, the path that, again, plays into a very narrow domestic political agenda. And we see it in other countries as well. And it's certainly something that Ireland and other European states and other leaders like South Korea and Canada are definitely something that we'd want to go that. We want to maintain those open economies, open borders, to allow commerce and enterprise to grow as fastly as possible.
Great point. You mentioned there about your experience going to Belgium and emigrating to Belgium as such, and that process took all of about a week. And interestingly enough, 52% of the placements that we provide consultancy on and to organizations here who are US multinationals in Ireland come from other EU member states, and they're primarily Germany, France, Spain and Italy, etc. Maybe if you would, as we wrap up here on the show, Neale, would you share with us, you know, the culture in Ireland, and how would you describe the crack, spelled C-R-A-I-C, and how we kind of position ourselves as a nation, as it were?
Yeah, as I think before, we're a very open country. We're exposed to the world in terms of Irish people have travelled for generations, and that's why we're quite comfortable with people coming to Ireland. And it's a lovely place, not just to work, but to live. You know, it's only 2 hours to drive across the country. You can be out of the city within half an hour and be in lush countryside, mountainside. You can 10 minutes from the city centre, you're on the beach. You can go up to Donegal and get some of the best surfing beaches in the world. We don't take ourselves too seriously. And whilst there is a huge work ethic, Irish people are known, they come in, they do their work, but they make sure they enjoy it as well. And for anyone looking to relocate or looking for a new opportunity, it's something that has huge potential in a very safe country, great healthcare, great opportunities, not just from a business section, but from an education section, from a cultural sector, from a sporting culture. We have our own indigenous sport, but access to European sport. And at the end of the day, if you had a long week in Dublin, you can be in Paris in an hour and a half. You don't need a visa. You can get a flight for less than €100 in normal times, and that'll continue. We're the gateway into the European Union, and we're a very, very short flight across the Atlantic at the same time.
I think that's a great summary. Well, look, I want to really thank you for joining us on today's show, Neale. It's been a real pleasure.
Okay, best luck. Thanks so much for having me.
You've been listening to the Global Tech Leaders Podcast, designed for both established and aspiring career-focused tech rock stars, as well as helping leadership figure out how to speak global in today's multicultural world. For further details, check out sf-talent.com.